You'll get your sea legs back in a minute.
I'm late. Is it okay if I sit here?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. All balanced out.
What's the name of this boat?
It is a War Eagle.
What's its name?
Like ship name? We have a name.
Oh, I thought that's what the,
Man,
it was.
you got it.
I never heard of
Yeah, so it all really started with an island that's downstream from here called Sandy Island. And there was a proposal to build a bridge to the island that was proposed for logging operations. And the island has longleaf pine and red-cockaded woodpeckers, and there was a lot of concern about the development of that island. And a development plan was found in the midst of all the proposals. And so a group of conservation organizations proposed that Sandy Island become a national wildlife refuge, and it was really controversial because the owners didn't want to sell their land, they wanted to develop it. And long story short, an agreement was reached to set it up as a mitigation bank for highway projects, and the private landowners sold it to South Carolina DOT. And in the midst of all that, the refuge was expanded beyond. Initially, it was called, the proposal was Sandy Island Refuge, but it was changed to Waccamaw, and the scope of the project was expanded to include forested wetlands, tidal wetlands, a lot of different habitats to really make up the diversity of the watershed, and including Sandy Island. So we did a 2.5-year environmental impact statement, and here we are, almost this December will be 25 years later, and we've grown the refuge to about 38,000 acres.
So it was an active program.
No, it was an act of the Fish and Wildlife Service. A lot of the older refuges were established under presidential proclamation or a variety of other tools, but this was actually approved and created.
For a while, it's
When they logged all this originally, they would leave these hollow trees, obviously, that have lasted for many, many years, but and they provide a lot of habitat for different species, but the older solid trees were all taken out. I'd say that they're probably more in the 60 to 70 years old. Some of these larger cypress sticks that live solid are probably naturally when they cut them.
at least some kind of land, or that's just automatically?
There's just, these swamps are full of what the hydrologists, the USGS hydrologists have taught me that they call
That one back there's old too.
And so you have high ground and you got low spots, and these plants get associated with different plant communities do what they do best where the elevation allows it.
I have a theory that So some of these larger cypress trees, the Carolina parakeets would have nested in them and eaten their seeds.
Oh, really?
And the same with the ivory-billed woodpecker. And I think that if there's a chance that maybe there's an old skull, an old 200-year-old skull, maybe buried down, you know, under layers of nest in these old trees.
Wow.
And so I've thought, like, maybe is there a way I could send like a GoPro in some of the cavities with a light on it to try to see, you know, what old nests or old bones are up in some of these cavities.
Yeah, we're gonna bump and go.
But anyways, that's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Skull of what?
Like a Carolina parakeet or an ivory-billed woodpecker.
I see.
Because they were here up until maybe 150 years ago. But yeah, our extinct birds nested in these great trees, and so I figure if there is still a natural, you know, maybe a skull would be the only thing would be left.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
That'd be cool.
but I figure that would be a pretty cool discovery. And yeah, I've got cameras that I could put on a pole and, you know, send in and look around. Keep an eye on. Yeah. This is spectacular. These are all, yeah, maybe 800, 500, 800 years old.
It's hard for me to see what's coming. But you have to protect yourself.
Yeah. Wow. It is so crazy though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Trees and the knees are very fascinating.
Okay, I'll
'cause
definitely watch that.
they bind and grow together with like tupelo roots and with other root systems of other trees. They exchange nutrients and information, and they're like Velcro. They all hold hands under the water level and keep these really huge trees upright when the hurricanes come.
Wow. Okay, I would definitely watch that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Man and woman for yourself.
You're doing fine.
It is so crazy though. 1, 2, 3, 4.
These creeks get really braided towards the end.
The water's kind of cold for them to
I'm gonna lift this up again. Arm down. Thornetary warbler.
Oh, okay.
They migrate up from like Brazil or
Yeah.
somewhere, which is really cool. They're beautiful yellow.
Some locals call them swamp canaries, and it's kind of ironic they're called that. They're really bright yellow, but they are a canary in the sense of, you know, ecosystem, forest health, and you know, they're really, really cool birds. Watch your face.
I have to ask you, the Black Panther, the myth or
Complete myth.
complete myth? Well, not Puma, but Panthera.
Well, the black part's the myth. That whether we have
Eastern
have
cougar.
mountain lions, or eastern cougars, or Florida panthers, or anything like that moving in the area, I would say that lots of wildlife are changing their range habitats, and so, but I cringe every time somebody says I saw a black panther, because that is.
I've been asking a lot of people. I'm trying to collect stories. I believe that they
There
were.
went a planetary right there.
I saw it.
Two of them, but the bottom, the one down low, man, Florida panthers and all that. And he was down in Charleston flats fishing with his sons, and he heard something splash in the water, and he thought it was his son fighting a fish, and he was walking around these little hammock islands, and he saw an eastern cougar or something that came out, and he said, I know what I saw. He says it's somebody's pet that they let go and it's wandering around. He's like, that's probably what it is, but he's like, it was a long-tailed cat. I saw it very clearly in water go from one island to the next. So,
Any Bigfoot sightings here?
I wish.
really and truly, I don't know when it happened, but a lot of that area that borders the refuge that hadn't been developed yet, Dawn can describe it better as far as the location, but if you look real closely on the edge of the swamp, you can see where they filled, it may have been uplands, but there's concrete, there's tires, there's all kinds of stuff that were dumped on the edge of the swamp to build up that area for the golf course or whatever was in the plans back then. So, there's a lot of what I would call C&D type fill that's been put on the edge of the swamps.
What's C&D?
C&D is construction and demolition. So
I
it's,
see.
Somebody's got a driveway that they're going to destroy, so they bust up the concrete and they take a dump truck. Somebody takes it and dumps it somewhere they want to fill an area.
Oh, I can understand.
But if you look real closely, if you follow the golf course path that kind of goes from Dawn's condo along the edge of the swamp, you'll see lots of stuff that somebody brought in and dumped.
Okay.
And that's the kind of stuff that impacts the refuge more than anything. That plus, you heard limpkins yesterday. You probably saw the apple snails.
Lots of them, yeah.
Those are invasive species that could cause a lot of ecological harm to tidal wetlands downstream if they ever get established. But at the same time, they provide food for the limpkins, and that's why the limpkins are there. So,
Would the limpkins eat anything else?
they do feed on other things, but I suppose that the prolific nature of that invasive species is what makes them dial in on a modified wetland system like that particular area.
It was shocking to see how many thousands of them. I mean, in one little area we were walking around, they were everywhere.
You've been to Island Green and seen all that? Yeah.
Yeah, we went in, in 50 yards, and there were it was carpeted with these huge shells. I've never seen that before.
Well, during one of the hurricanes, and I don't remember which one, but they were first discovered in a drainage that was coming into the Waccamaw. And so South Carolina DNR and some other folks were very aggressive in trying to treat it. And they thought they had contained it. And they had narrowed it down to one pond and one ditch, and they were trying to basically eradicate it. And I wasn't following the program that closely. It was something outside of our scope, but I later was called by a kayaker a couple years ago before I met Dawn, and he was up here putting in at Enterprise Landing, and he called me and was like, man, I see the egg masses on the cypress trees on the Intercoastal Waterway. And I said I was worried that they are still around. And then when I went to Island Green and walked around that area and saw them, I was like, they didn't get rid of them like they thought they did. And DNR more or less told me after the fact, because I called them to see if there was something we could do, and they were like, they're probably already in the watershed, and there's nothing we can do, and you know, so.
How long ago did they first show up here?
The first time I learned about them, I would say it was probably around 2012, somewhere around that time frame.
It's crazy, not that long ago.
But I think there was one little residential subdivision where somebody dumped them out, and they got started.
I guess we don't really know yet. I mean, they could be really bad for all we know.
Yeah. Well, so on the lower end of the Waccamaw, there are some private landowners that are working really hard to reestablish rice. And from what I've read about them, if they get into rice fields, they can have a serious ecological impact on rice farming and all that. So, you know, I'm a believer what's supposed to be here should be, and what's not shouldn't be. But, you know, whether we can control the spread or whatever, you know, I don't know really enough about it.
Yeah. I feel like with the snail, it's almost impossible to control that, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sure they populate pretty quickly.
That's why we need more limpkins. Take care of it.
Well, that would probably be the way. The way to control them would be the limpkins, because that's the thing. Out of all the hundreds of shells we picked up or looked at, investigated, they were all empty. So the limpkins are doing something.
The challenge in all of this, and I'm going to be as blunt and honest as I can be, when you wind up with one wildlife species or an endangered species, or you're hanging everything on that species, you're not doing any favors to that particular species. If you're using a red-cockaded woodpecker, or, you know, a black bear, or whatever it is, you know, the best thing for a lot of these species is more habitat, more openness to manage for them, and so, I mean, I've been accused for years with the whole refuge that we're creating an environment which is frogs against humanity, and I didn't come up with that. That was a county council person that said that to me one time. But it's not frogs against humanity. It's really humanity depends on those frogs, and you got to develop the relationship and the understanding. And you can't, when you pit these wildlife species like the limpkin, if the limpkin was so seriously threatened or endangered that we could come in and stop the development, well, what's going to happen is the limpkins are going to lose eventually, because everybody's going to be like, you know, all I need to do is dump something in that pond and kill all the snails, and then there won't be any limpkins, you know. And so, you know, it takes communities. We would have never protected Sandy Island without the community on Sandy Island being in favor of it. And so it takes community buy-in, and unfortunately when the trees are falling and the plans are laid and the developments are underway, it is next to impossible to put the brakes on it. And I'm not a defeatist, or I don't give up, but I'm just trying to be, if I fought every battle against something along the edge of the refuge, I wouldn't have time to do what I want to do and need to do, which is find quality habitat and buy it before somebody develops it. And, you know, had I known a long time ago that golf course was going to be repurposed and changed, I would probably try to find a way to do something 15 years ago. Sorry. I don't feel like I showed you as much as I would have hoped.
So first of all, I sent a report to you on Peach Creek, okay? And I was arguing that Peach Creek and its whole system is a natural waterway and not a system of man-made ditches, okay? And it's not clear exactly who is saying it's a ditch. It seems to just be coming up a lot. Okay.
Is the reason for?
Well, it's just kind of like, why worry about it? It's just a ditch.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm kind of getting the impression a lot of what's being called ditches here are natural waterways. Okay. And so this is an example here. Okay, so this is how it was just explained to me by Dawn. Okay, is that I'm going about 15 feet in, you're in the developer's property, okay? And that the plan is to clear cut all of these trees, okay? Now, so this leads to the wildlife refuge right there, at those big trees, okay? And you'll have water flowing both ways, okay? Flowing into the refuge, and the water's on the refuge, it'll flow the other way, okay? Now there's a dam here, okay, which is more clear when the water level's lower, and then there's a pipe that conveys water under the dam to the refuge, okay? But this really looks to me like it's a natural waterway, especially going in that direction, okay? And so this kind of brings the question, how does someone acquire private ownership of a natural waterway? Okay, who gave the developer permission to dam a natural waterway? Okay, those are the kind of the questions coming up in my mind.
Well, I know this waterway, I know this dam has been here for a very long time. It was before the developer. See, okay, here's my home right here. That's where we're at. All this is what flooded.
Dang.
And this right here is a conservation area that evidently the HOA here owns. And that's a conservation area too. But the creek goes right down through it.
So it currents and goes up that way?
Yep, goes straight across.
So this is a part of Peach Creek that branches off. We're gonna check it out. Get some footage of it, see if it's a natural waterway.
They tend to be quite a bit, not come down so steeply, but I think the main thing is that it was kind of wide, broad meanders. And so that's the same ditch that then goes behind the house. You see what a wide bend is coming out that culvert there. Comes all the way around like this, and then behind the house. Okay. Now, this is something to think about is what's the significance of the fact that everyone's calling natural waterways ditches. Okay. That's how I got into this originally, is various people connected me with Dawn and said, well, how could you argue that Peach Creek is a natural waterway? So I explained all of that in my report, okay? But it didn't exactly seem to matter to anyone, and I'm not exactly sure why not.
That's kind of crazy.
There's a culvert coming in. We believe it goes underneath the condos from Peach Creek.
So here we are on the other side of these condos. Beautiful pileated woodpecker back there. Really beautiful spot. The National Refuge sign, so this is all refuge. Just absolutely gorgeous though. I want to get in there. All right, so this is the opposite side of this drainage ditch, which they're calling, which is definitely natural. It kind of spreads out, flows into the swamp. We'll definitely be exploring that. But this is the other side where it's been dammed. Right here you can see all the rocks. So this tree right here, the water was over this line 2 years ago. the water was above this line, which is 4 feet up. Look at that. Oh, wow. Look at that. So this is the overflow area.
I don't see how they can do it without destroying Peach Creek.
Well, I mean, how high is the road going to be?
We've got a great blue heron, an alligator, and a limpkin.
This is Peach Creek right here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, going that way toward the refuge.
Yep.
Saw the water coming through their yard. That's when we bailed the neighborhood. Next morning, the National Guard was in here evacuating whoever was left.
Yeah. And we watched them evacuate people like from Kudrow's house and whatnot. And we were the last car to drive out because the National Guard said, if you don't leave now, we can't come back and get you. So we drove out and they drove behind us in this big truck. They had that ladder to climb up in there, whatever kind it was. And they said, we'll push you if you get stuck, but we got out.
Yeah, I meant, because
Right at the last
at
minute.
the time I had a carload of the ground. My neighbor had come back from the store. He said I could barely get in because the water was starting to come across the road. And I said, that's it, we're getting out of here.
Yeah,
So we packed up the important stuff and left. And everybody else was leaving.
Feeling better today?
But yeah, I was surprised it came this way
They're
because
on my second day out.
we are closer to the water behind me. But it wasn't rising as fast from that direction as it was coming this way.
Guys gonna bail them.
So
It's terrible.
the water was coming, so there's kind of a drainage ditch that flows this way
Right.
behind those houses to the Waccamaw.
But it's a swamp.
It's
not a
swamp.
ditch, it's
It's a
big
huge
woods.
swamp and woods.
The water run, and I'm still confused because the stormwater guy was here after Matthew.
Yeah.
And we walked the neighborhood. And he was describing that the water went this way. But when you look back there at the water, it's flowing that way. So I'm not quite sure, but.
Okay, yeah, show me.
Yeah, they had enough of their own problems with enough people underwater.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, for example, I'm in a court case in Texas Gulf Coast where after Hurricane Harvey, all the water's coming down from the Houston area, okay,
Right.
flowing to the golf course. So Lake Jackson is basically Dow Chemical, okay? So Lake Jackson / Dow Chemical didn't want themselves to be flooded, so they built a dam along the highway, sandbag dam. And you know, in an urban area, you can't just push water back. It's just going to keep going downstream. So it flooded the next community downstream, which is Richwood, and destroyed 400 homes. Okay. Anyway, Lake Jackson has never taken responsibility for that. Okay, but I'm part of that lawsuit. If you damage someone else in the course of saving yourself, you still compensate that person. You're still responsible. The reason I'm here is I'm addressing two questions on behalf of Saving Island Green. One is what will be the impact of the recent development, proposed development in progress on flooding on Island Green, and then also what will be the impact of the new development on the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. And in both cases, I'm looking at stormwater, principally both quantity and quality of stormwater. And these are questions that I could have addressed solely from electronic information, from Google Earth, from plans, from maps. But I always like to see things on the ground. This is both in terms of the natural environment and the stormwater infrastructure and the people. I like to see it on the ground. So I can give you a couple of general impressions that actually weren't clear to me before it came. And one is that the stormwater infrastructure is in very poor condition and does not seem to be maintained by anybody. Okay, so by stormwater infrastructure, I'm mostly referring to the drainage ditches that are found along the sides of many roads. The other thing that's really struck me is the disconnect between stormwater management. By that, I'm referring to stormwater management at the governmental or regulatory level, and the people who live here. For example, no one really seems to understand or knows who's in charge of taking care of stormwater ditches, who's in charge of cleaning the woody debris out. In many cases, people just don't know. In some cases, people say, well, each homeowner takes care of the drainage ditch in front of their house like it's shoveling the sidewalk. Well, that's okay if it's snow, but in terms of stormwater, what someone does or doesn't do affects the people upstream and downstream. The other kind of disconnect is that nobody seems to know how is it that developments are approved. How is it a stormwater plan is developed? Who is it who approves it? Whoever approves it, what is it they're supposed to establish? What is it they're supposed to demonstrate? What's the basis for approving or not approving someone's stormwater plan? And I'm not saying this knowledge is not available, but it's not known by people who are very actively involved in neighborhood associations. So there's a really serious disconnect in that there's no real communication between the county and the population on the subject. And it's not the case everywhere. I mean, many places in South Carolina, even very small places, I'll name one, city of Foley Beach on the tip of James Island. Even that little town has a full-time job, something like stormwater outreach and education coordinator. Stormwater is such an important issue. Well, someone needs to communicate between the government and the residents in this area. And it's been surprising me how nobody seems to have knowledge in that area. Nobody feels that they have any input, anyone cares about their feedback, anyone asks for their comments, anyone responds to their comments if they have concerns. Most people's impression is that development just happens, whether the residents like it or not.
But wait, listen to the echoes of construction rampaging ahead in the near background, directly impacting these last few remaining old-growth swamps. For those of us living on a peninsula, these are our most vital habitats. So before we go on about current flooding, stormwater problems, let's go back 70, 50, or even 30 years, when the timber industry and later developments filled in natural cypress wetlands just like these. These places are suited for the amount of water that flows through this ever-changing ecosystem. These are heritage places, filled with ancient trees that are the absolute best suited habitat for stormwater and flood management. So if you ask the natives and the locals, they'll tell you that unsustainable development has gone too far. How can we expect this overburdened and pristine environment to endure continued stormwater runoff, an ever-depleting ecosystem, a flood of fertilizer, debris, and even feces? How can we expect our existing heritage wetlands and rivers to remain clean and free?
I have been impressed at the amount of wildlife I've seen in this area. Limpkins, their food, the Apple Island snails, alligators, ospreys, hawks, bald eagles. I mean, really wonderful, really a treasure. It's really a treasure to live right next to a national wildlife refuge and to have that close contact with nature. To think that all of that nature-human interaction is just going to be destroyed just to put in endless development with no concern for the environment. It's a pretty sad situation.
It is sad, and you know, I want to note one thing as we sit out here and you've got your hand on a tree that is maybe 500, 600, maybe even 800 years old. These, and we're surrounded, actually, there's 5 other trees of this size right around us, and you know, this is a heritage place. This tree is a gem, and we can hear not too far away the sound of progress, the sound of development, the sound of wetlands and environments like this being destroyed. And it's just so strange to be out here and to be so close to such an amazing, old, important organism. These swamps are so important to the stormwaters and the floodwaters that come through this area. This swamp tide here can rise sometimes up to 10 feet, yet we can hear the process of filling and building just right in the background. And so I guess, what is the significance of having this incredible swamp here, but that's so close, right up against this swamp, they're filling wetlands, they're destroying these wetlands? What is the contrast? What does that mean to this place?
Well, you know, what people like is they like to get out in nature. They like to feel the peacefulness. They like to sit out and think. They like to listen to the silence. You know, just from based on what I see, all I see is Peach Creek and the tall cypress trees. I'm surrounded by nature. But I know just out of my sight is bulldozers, excavating equipment, whatever machinery you use to build a development. It's a shame that you can't come out here in a kayak and find quiet. You can't come out here and find peace.
how can also that development they're building, how could the runoff from that development, would that increase the probability of flooding in neighboring developments? And also, would that runoff potentially affect this cypress swamp we're in right now?
Okay, so stormwater, the stormwater runoff from the developments is going to enter into Peach Creek and the Wildlife Refuge, and with no plan for treatment. So it's just raw stormwater, okay? And raw stormwater can have all kinds of things in it. It can have fertilizers, nitrates, phosphates. It can have insecticides, whatever people are putting on their lawns. It can sweep up oil stains from cars, heavy metals, bits of brake lining, okay? Heavy metals, hydrocarbons, nitrate, phosphate, pesticides, insecticides, fertilizers. That kind of sums up stormwater runoff, okay? And this is an excellent question. Well, what's going to be the impact on this refuge? Well, the simple answer is, well, if you don't study it, then nobody knows. Okay, so this is what really is a shame, is that nobody feels there's any obligation to talk about, well, what will be the impact of that development on the refuge. Okay, and I'm not just talking about the development that we're listening to right now. I mean, there's developments in progress or in the permitting stage or planned or proposed or desired all along the boundary of this refuge. And the cumulative impact of all those developments can be considerable. Okay, well, what's it going to be? Well, if you don't study it, you don't know. If you don't study baseline conditions, you don't know. So this is really a shame to have all this development going on without any environmental impact study, any study of how this might affect the refuge.
I guess, is there any final thoughts on this trip, and what are the steps forward? How can we slow or how can we bring about more sustainable, responsible development efforts?
Well, the path forward is not obvious, okay? Because we have a system that's basically rigged, where the developer is going to get his way, and I don't mind saying his because usually it is a man, okay? The developer is going to get his way because the system is rigged in his favor, okay? There's no place where the public can respond, where the public can vote, the public can have a referendum, the public can have their concerns taken seriously. There's a local government that is dominated by developers. I can't say for certain in this county. I know I've worked in other counties and cities in the southeast where the entire city council is developers. Okay, so the system is rigged in their favor. How are you going to change that system is not really an obvious thing to do. Okay, when you got a game that's rigged so you lose, sometime in some way you have to act outside of that game. Somehow you have to not play by those rules and make your own rules. I'm not saying it's obvious how to do that. Okay, this is often a dilemma faced by communities. Okay, they say we need independent scientists, we need scientific advice, we need to know the environmental impact. We need to know we need a study of flooding. Okay, those are all excellent questions. But just because communities have that information doesn't mean they have anything to do with that information. People say communities need knowledge, but often they already have the knowledge. They can engage a scientist to reinforce that knowledge, but then the issue is, well, what do they do with that knowledge? Who cares about that knowledge? Who's going to listen to that knowledge? Okay, these are not obvious. There's no obvious answers to those questions. Okay. You know, sometimes this is not really new what I'm saying, but it's something I often like to end with. Okay, is to think about future generations. To think about 2, 3, 5, 10 generations down the road. 10 generations, that's 300 years. That's not really that far down the road, okay? And to think about, what are they going to think about us? What are they going to think about their ancestors? A lot of the things that people do these days are essentially like a curse upon future generations. That they're going to have to deal with fallout. They're going to have to deal with the outcome. And what are they going to think about us? That their ancestors left this curse for them to deal with. And, you know, it's very standard. You know, many traditional societies, they hold their ancestors in such great respect. All the good things that they have, they owe to the ancestors. And just to think about our descendants, thinking about their ancestors like a curse, okay, that all the problems they have is due to their ancestors. Just something to think about.
That is a very good point. As you have your hand upon a tree that maybe one of our ancestors might have had that same, place their hand upon this tree and maybe had thoughts about the disappearing parakeets or the disappearing trees in this area. Maybe similar thoughts have been said or thought about in the same place. Who knows?
Well, you know, I've got a hand on a tree, and some ancestor, probably not my direct ancestor, but some ancestor also had his or her hand on this tree. I don't have any complaint against that ancestor. Okay, I have a lot of respect for that ancestor. They're certainly not the ones who drove the Carolina parakeet or the ivory-billed woodpecker into extinction. You know, think about one of our descendants down the road and they got their hand on an old rusted bulldozer blade. They're going to have the same kind of respect?